Zafiomi is Sanhedrin Lama Gimel Manal, Sanhedrin 33a. We're going to start on the top of Lama Gimel. Amadal, two lines from the top, and today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. So the Gemara says, we had said in our Mishnah that if it was a dine mamanos, that if it was a monetary case, then we are mafsir, then we can nullify the ruling whether to make him liable or not liable. So the Gemara challenges this because we have a contradictory source from a Mishnah in the Choros where it says Dana Sadin Zike Es Zakai Dana Sadin Zike Es Achai Chiyav Es Zakai Time Es Atar Tiar Es Atame Masha also every Yashami Beso. It says in the Mishnah in the Choros that once the court has adjudicated, if you made the one who is liable, not liable, or who made the one who is not liable, liable, or if you were mitame the tahor or mitara the tame, now what you've done is done, and the judge has to pay for it from his household, meaning to say you can't undo, you can't nullify the ruling. So the Mishnah B'choro says you don't nullify the ruling, but our Mishnah here says you do nullify the ruling. So which is it? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef. So the Gemara is going to give several answers to this question. When it says you can nullify the ruling in the Mishnah and Bechor, and when it says over here you can nullify the ruling, that's by an expert. And therefore the litigant can say, you have no authority to do it. No, since he's an expert, he has the ability to nullify the ruling. When the Mishnah and Bechor says he has to pay, and he can't nullify the ruling, that's because he's not an expert, so he can't nullify the ruling. So when you say it's an expert, he can nullify the ruling. But we are going to learn it in continuation of that same Mishnah. It says if he was an expert to the court, he's exempt from paying, which means to say that, which we see from here, that by an expert, whatever he's done is done, and you can't nullify it. And so you can't nullify the ruling. So therefore, we see from here, and nevertheless, he's exempt from pay. Since he's an expert, it's not his fault that he made a mistake. And it's just the bad luck of the person who he ruled against. So we see from the Mishnah in Bechoros, and the continuation of the Mishnah in Bechoros, that also a mumcha cannot undo the ruling. If he was a non-expert, he has to pay, but if he's not an expert, he's exempt. So Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman gives the answer is Kanche ish gadol imenu b'chachma v'minyan, Kanche ein gadol imenu b'chachma v'minyan. We're on the top of 33a, around 10 lines from the top. So he says where we say that he has the ability to overrule him. And so that's where there's somebody who's greater than him. There's a greater judge. And so the greater judge can nullify the ruling and cancel it. And so therefore we overturn it. The Mishnah Bechor says we can overturn it. That's where there's nobody greater than him. You got a question, Jeff? So the Mishnah Bechor says where there's nobody greater than him. And so therefore they can't nullify the ruling. So the Gemara says, so that's the first answer. Again, what's the question? The question is, why does our Mishnah here say in a monetary case you can nullify the ruling, and the Mishnah Bechor says you can't nullify the ruling? So the first answer is our Mishnah here is talking about an expert, and the Mishnah Bechor is talking about somebody who's not an expert. Even though the Mishnah Bechor says that if there's an expert, he's exempt. So the Gemara's answer to that question was, it depends if there's somebody greater than him. If there's somebody greater, he can nullify the ruling of the expert, if it's a senior judge. Rav Sheshes gives a different answer. Depends on the type of mistake that's made. Depends if they made a mistake on an explicit Mishnah, meaning to say, yeah, it's a black letter law. You just read the rule wrong. So then you can overturn it. That's what our Mishnah here is talking about. But the Mishnah in Bechoros, which says you can't overturn it, that is where it's shiko adas. And we'll see what shiko adas is, but it's not a black letter law. If it's a mistake in a black letter law, an explicit ruling in the Mishnah, you had a question, Jeff? Oh, because you just unmuted yourself, so I assumed that was what you were going to ask a question. So comment of our Mishnah.
No, sorry, I'm just having trouble with my ears.
Okay, fine. So comment of our Mishnah So when it's a mistake of an explicit ruling in the Mishnah, then you can overturn it. Poser. Tav b'shikol hadas ain't no poser. But if it's a mistake in a shikol hadas, which we'll see in a moment what that is, then the judgment cannot be nullified. If there's a mistake in the Mishnah, it's not a rule. It's not a ruling. It's just so obviously wrong. So Amar Ravino Rav Ashi, I feel b'tav b'Rabbi Chiya Rabbi Shai. What's considered shikol hadas? Even if you make a mistake with something like Rabbi Chiya Rabbi Shai says, Amar in yes. I feel b'Rav Shmuel in something a mistake like Rav Shmuel. Amar in yes. I feel b'Didi b'Dach. Even if he made a mistake. Meaning to say, even if he made a mistake in the position that you and I ruled, that's what Ravina says to Rav Ashi. Amarle, Atu Anan Katlei Kani Ba'agma. Anan, do you think that we are people, are just people who cut down reeds and gather them up in the swamp? Meaning to say that our opinions aren't correct? Of course. If you made a mistake in something that we explicitly ruled, that we have a black letter ruling about, and then it's called a mistake in Dvar Mishnah. That's called a mistake in the Mishnah, and therefore, under those circumstances, the matter will be reversed. What's the definition of this matter that we call shikol hadas? Shikol means the weighing of the opinions. What is that circumstance? Amar Papa could go and trade Tanai or trade Amorai. Let's say you have two Tanaim and two Amoraim that argue with each other. And the law is not orient like either one. There's not explicit ruling. And this person rules like one of them. And the main ruling, most of the people in the world follow the other one. This judge followed this one. Even though he has a basis that he could do it, it's not the normal thing. Hainu shikol hadas. That's going to be considered shikol hadas, and the law does not go back under those circumstances. So the Gemara says, is it really the case who says that if you say you've made a mistake on an explicit ruling, it goes back? Gemara says, what about the following case? There was an incident. There was a cow. There was a cow, and basically the womb of the cow was taken out. Rabbi Tarfon said, "Oh, it's treifa, can't eat it." He said, "Give it to the dogs." The matter came before the Chamim, and they allowed it. Why? Because they said Tudos Arofe, Tudos, who was a doctor, and he did anatomy. He must have done. He looked at the corpses of the animals. He says, "Aim para v'chazira yotes me'Alexandria shalom v'tayim king chol tchinaim shlo." He says, "No cow or pig goes out of Alexandria unless they first cut out the womb, and then they still live. So it's clearly not a treifa." They the Egyptians wanted them buying the cows and pigs straight from Egypt. They didn't want them reproducing outside of Egypt. Anyway, we see from here. And Amar Rabbi Tarfon halacha. So Rabbi Tarfon had ruled incorrectly. He had ruled it was a treifa, and after he gave this ruling, the Chachamim said you made a mistake. So Amar Rabbi Tarfon hochel chamorcha Tarfon. He says, Tarfon said about himself, you lost your donkey, meaning to say, because since we can't overturn the ruling, I have to pay for it. So Amar Rabbi Akiva. And even though that was a black letter law, so first of all, you're exempt. He says anybody who's an expert is exempt from having to pay. And so therefore, since you're an expert, you're exempt from having to pay. But if you're going to say the Isa, and if you're going to say that anybody makes a mistake in a black letter law, like Rav Sheshes had said, also is exempt from having to pay because you just look at the case again and correct the wrong. Rabbi Akiva should have said to Rabbi Tarfon, you don't have to pay because it was a mistake in a black letter law. The animal's obviously not a treifa. And somebody makes a mistake in a black letter law, it goes back. And so the Gemara says, he said two reasons. One and also the other. First of all, you don't have to pay because Torah b'dvar Mishnah Torah b'dvar Mishnah choser. First of all, you don't have to pay because it was a mistake in a black letter law and it's reversed. And even if you were going to say it was a mistaken evaluation, you're an expert. And since you're an expert, you're exempt from having to pay. uh, so the Gemara says that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says to Rabbah, what kind of questions are Rav Nuna asking to Rav Sheshes from the case of the cow? Para achilu leklavim, the way he said this ahadar, the cow has already been fed to the dogs, and you can't get it back. And if that's the case, it's not going to help that he says you made a mistake in the Mishnah, and therefore I cancel it. I don't do it because there is nothing to, you can't reverse it, and so therefore there's only one reason why it is them, not because he can undo the law, but because he's an expert. Gemara says, this is what Rav Hamnuna asked to Rav Sheshes. If you want to say there was a mistake in the black letter one, it doesn't go back. Alma kam dina. So if that will be the case, then the law will be established, and it can't be canceled. Hainu to come mafked Rabbi Tarfon. That's why Rabbi Tarfon was saying, I lost my donkey. The Kamrulei Iyo and Rabbi Akiva said, you're an expert and you don't have to pay. There, but if you want to say you can't do it, then Rabbi Akiva should have said, since if it was the cow was here, your ruling would not be a ruling, and you wouldn't have done nothing. Also, now you haven't done anything. So that was the argument. So now the Gemara goes back to the fundamental question, which is the difference between our Mishnah here, which says you can nullify a monetary law, and the Mishnah in Bechoros, which says that you cannot. Rav Chisda Amar Kan. So the distinction is, we've seen a couple of possible distinctions. One is, the first case is one is an expert, one's a non-expert, one is a mistake in a black letter law versus a mistake in shikol hadat. Now we have a third answer. Rav Chisda says, Kan shenatol v'nasam b'yad. It depends whether or not the judge physically handed it over, and then once he's done that, then you can't undo it because he physically did it. So that's the case. But if he didn't physically hand it over, the law could be reversed. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, well, it doesn't make sense. I can understand if he said the one who's not liable is liable, and he made him pay, that he took it where he physically handed it over, and then we're going to say, so under those circumstances, you can't undo it. But when you say you made the one who is liable not liable, what did he hand over? He didn't hand anything over. So the Gemara says, this is the question. He said you're exempt, but he didn't actually hand anything over. So how would Rav Chisda explain it? Gemara says no. First, the attempt at the Gemara is keeping the Amar Patrata. Since he said you're exempt, commotion. It's as though he picked it up and handed it over. So it's a little bit shvach, a little bit forced, but it's as though he handed it over. The Gemara says it doesn't make sense. But according to our Mishnah, you're going to say, if he says you're exempt, it's as though you handed it over. According to our Mishnah, it says that monetary law you can nullify both for a merit and for liable and for not liable. I understand if he says you're not liable, mishkachas law, I can understand how you can go back. He said, first of all, you're liable, and so therefore he didn't hand anything over. But if we said that you're liable, how can we say you reverse it? Our Mishnah, which says you can nullify the ruling. Well, if he says you're liable, that means if he says you're exempt, so he says patarata, so that it's like he handed it over, so you should never be able to reverse that. So the Gemara says, rather, we have to say chada katani. Our Mishnah is talking about one case. Dine mamanos machzir l'schos shehi chova. That monetary law, you can. It's just talking about one case. What's the case? Our Mishnah is talking about a case where the judge says that the plaintiff was liable, but he didn't hand it over. and then he wants to say he's not liable. And our Mishnah is saying, Dina Mamonas Machzir L'Schus, you can nullify to say he's not liable, even though Sheichova, even though the other person is going to lose money as a result. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, it doesn't work out for different reasons. The Kavase Gabedina Nefashos, when it's the case by a capital case, we say Machzir L'Schus on the top of 33b. We return him to say he's innocent. Machzir L'Chova, but we don't return him to make him guilty. Machzir L'Schus, I understand we return him to make him acquitted. Schus Gredasa. That's only a merit for the one who is for the defendant. Machzir L'Chova, and it says when it says we don't return him to convict him. If you want to say it's when that merit is when that innocence is an obligation for somebody else, chavase deman, who's being convicted here? That doesn't make sense. The parallel doesn't work for the dinei fashos. Gemara says no. I'll tell you it does. It's for the family members who are so outraged that this person is now being sent free. He's being outraged. So we'll return him even though it's a chova for this person. So the Gemara says it doesn't make sense. Mishum chovase to go adam katlinu leilahai, because there's an obligation the go adam is now unable to kill him. Katlinu leilahai, we're going to call this person even though the judge has made a mistake and he's innocent. Oh, my bain. So the Gemara says kasha. Okay, so the parallel doesn't work by the dinei nefashos. So therefore, Ravina gives a different answer. Ravina says you could explain the question of Rav Chisda that our Mishnah you can explain like Rav Chisda that our Mishnah is talking about a case where he didn't physically hand it over, and the Mishnah of course is saying where the judge physically handed over. And the problem that you said is, how can the judge hand it over when he says that the person is not liable? He didn't hand anything over. Ravina has an answer. Could go and Shaya Biado Mashkino. No, the person had in his hand a collateral. He had a pawn. So the judge took it away from him. He said, you are, when he said, you're not liable. And so therefore, he took the mash going away from the person who was holding it. And he took the mash going back from the plaintiff, and he gave it back to the defendant, and so that's the case. And so to Timei Sahara, the Agi Beis Sheretz, what's the case where he said a person who was tahor, he made him tamei, that the judge took a sheretz, took a rodent, and he put it on the fruits, and so to prove that they're tamei. And then it became clear that it was a mistake, and the fruits were not tamei. That's where he was mitame the things that he put upon them. And tiaras a tamei, she'irvam bein perusav. What did he took something that was tamei and he purified it. The judge took these fruits and he mixed them up amongst other fruits to show that they are for sure tahor. And then it became clear he made a mistake, so he caused it with his hands, and so those laws cannot be undone. So the Gemara now says dinei nefashos, if it's a capital case, machzir noso ben l'schus ben l'chova. No, excuse me. If it's a capital case, you return it to make him innocent, but not to make him convicted. How do you know if you're coming out of the court and you're liable? You're convicted. And somebody says, I can rule a merit for him. So how do we know we bring him back? Don't kill an innocent person. But really the pasuk says, we'll get back to that. How do we know if you're coming out of the court acquitted? Somebody says I can convict him. We don't return him. Don't convict a person who's a tzaddik. And the opposite, meaning to say, once he's acquitted, once we declare him tzaddik, that he's acquitted, we don't bring him back to the court. And Rav Shimi Bar Ashi says the opposite is by a masis. We already had a masis, is somebody who incites others to worship idolatry. You don't have mercy on him. Rav Kahana says a different idea for the fact that we don't have, that the masis, we bring him back to convict him, and we don't bring him back to acquit him. What's the source? It says, Ki arog targeno. From the Masis, it says, kill, you shall kill him. Let's say people kill accidentally, so they're obligated to be exiled. What's the law with respect to this? Is it like Dinei Nefashos that we don't bring them back unless it's to acquit? Or maybe it's like Dinei Momenos that both to acquit and to convict, we bring them back. So the Gemara says, Asir Rotzeach Rotzeach. We're going to learn Xera Shava from the word murderer that appears by a regular, full, intentional murderer to the accidental murderer. And so therefore we say it's the same law, that you bring him back to acquit, but not to convict. Chayavi Malkus, what about somebody who's responsible to get lashes? Atia Rasha Rasha. There we say we learn Xera Shava from the word that's said by capital punishment, Rasha Rasha. And so therefore we compare it also to chayve misos, to say you bring him back to acquit but not to convict. And then the Gemara says, so we go into the Mishnah that in the capital case we bring him back to say he's acquitted but not to convict him. Gemara says, what are we talking about? This law that if the judge has made a mistake, we don't bring him back to convict him. That's only talking about a case where the judge has made a mistake in something that the Sadducees would admit to. Something that Sadducees would not admit to, meaning to say it's oral law. The Sadducees did not accept the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, and so then under those circumstances we wouldn't bring it back. If it's so obvious, even the Sadducees would admit that, then it's not called a mistake. Zil karbe rafu. Go study it by a teacher, meaning to say it's something that everybody knows, and that's not called a ruling at all, and then you would bring him back even to convict him. Let's say he said this adulterer made a mistake by adultery. He said that they weren't guilty when they obviously were. What would be the case there? Mahu Amarway. While the fire is still burning, go and cut down the gourds. Meaning to say, you're still busy asking your question. You didn't pay attention. Obviously, something like that is Zil Karve Rafu. It's clear law that you would bring him back even to convict him on that. Imranami Amar Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yochanan Tab and Noah closer. If you made a mistake, you thought adultery is permitted, you bring him back to the court and you convict him. What's something that you don't? So even by matters of sexuality, what are matters that you wouldn't bring him back for? I'm Rabbi Avo. I'm Rabbi Yochanan Shalo Kedarka. So let's say you thought that Shalo Kedarka was not prohibited, and then it turns out you realize it was prohibited. Well, you wouldn't bring him back to convict him under those circumstances because it's not explicitly written in the Torah. It's just understood through the oral law. All right, this is today's daf. I want to say about the schedule. Tonight we'll do it, God willing, at 7:20, and tomorrow morning we'll do it only after the 8 a.m. minyan, because since it's a holiday, we do the daf at 8 a.m. A big shekorach to everybody. Everybody have an amazing day. Shekorach.